Now, the last video we talked about the foam roller and utilising it on those long muscles in the legs. But for me, that's pretty much as good as it gets when I'm using the foam roller. So I'm going to pop that one out of the way, and we're going to revert to my beautiful spiky balls. Okay. Now, this is a love-hate thing. Those of you that hate them, you know, maybe you'll never get over the hate and be able to enjoy the great benefits of these things. I urge you to try. Okay. Now, if you really can't tolerate spiky balls, now the thing to do would be to start yourself off probably with something simple, a tennis ball or a ball of some kind, just to get yourself used to the sensation of those pressure points. You know, if you're very tight, it will be very uncomfortable, you know, so you're pressing on it if you've got lots of them as well. Love these. Now, if we're talking about thighs, what I'm going to do is go through the thighs and the legs option again, and then I'm going to take you through to where I think these have just the best benefit, which is our buttocks. So let's go for those thighs. We've already done them with the foam roller in the last video, but these are really useful for getting into those little nooks and crannies in the thighs and in the legs as well. So I just want to go through that with you. Now, you might not have all this equipment with you, so it can be difficult. So I'm going to show you kind of what works best, and then if you haven't got bits of it, then you just try it without. So these weighted balls, these rounded balls, I'll often use these as a kind of support for the rolling of it, so that my arms aren't having to take quite so much strain. So I'll often get them used in class with that. But they're not too big that they lift just off the balls so much. Now, to start with what I said, probably pick one ball for each thigh, and then if you have got some of these weighted balls that you can then use, they're useful for hip support. So if I show you how to use them, and then I'll show you what happens if you don't have them. So I'll just lay myself over the top of the spiky balls in a sort of 3/4 plank position. That just begins to get the pressure coming on. And then if you do have something you can support the hips on, if you put just a cushion, it becomes sort of a bit obstructive. The reason I like the weighted balls is that they allow for this movement over the top. But without them, you're just having to go into a reasonably strong plank position. So it's fine if you haven't got the weighted balls. And so it's same as we did with the foam roller. We go for a little explore up and down the thigh. Now, obviously, we can target a bit better with the spiky balls. So if I can feel something on the one leg, I can just turn that a little bit and get into it, and I can roll the leg in and out from it. Same thing as before. If I find a spot that feels like it's reproducing discomfort, then I'll start to just try and move the muscle via the joint, just elongate and shorten through there and see how I feel, play around with it. The great thing about these balls is you can get a little bit closer to the kneecap area. You're not going to go on the kneecap, but around it, and you can move in a bit of a horseshoe. Now, I've got some horrific scar tissue around this, which you might even be able to hear. That's that clunking, which I really should work a bit harder at trying to loosen up. So you can just move in like a horseshoe sort of shape around that. So you can pick. You might find that you've got one leg that you need to do the work on, or it might be both. So what I was doing there is just rolling it like in a horseshoe kind of nature around the top of that kneecap. So there's a lot of quite fibrous tissue coming down as it converges towards the kneecap, and that can get really tethered up. So that's lovely to do for people generally that get anterior knee pain. I can't recommend that enough as a self-release tool. So that's how we can do it with both balls. You could target one thigh on its own by just putting the two balls in a line and then laying the thigh over the top. So essentially you've got one leg off the hook and the other leg's getting the work. So that can be a bit nicer to do because you're not getting attacked on both sides at once. But what you can do there is just target two ends of the muscle simultaneously. So that can be quite nice to do as well, quite beneficial. I use the word nice, I'm not sure it's nice, but once you get used to it, it does sort of feel fairly nice. So again, playing around with the angle that you're pointing, playing around with the angle of movement. You want to have a nice freely movable joint at the knee that's not being restricted by those quads, and that's what this is all about. Can I freely move, or have I got something restricting the movement, which means I'm going to then compensate somewhere else. So that's getting the quads with the spiky balls. The same thing as we did with the foam roller. Again, we've got to take not only this front bit, but we've got to look at these slices that are coming around the side as well. So again, maybe you use 2 balls, maybe if you're new to it you just use 1, so you're getting used to it. Again, ideally I like to use a round weighted ball just to give a little bit of support for this, so I can really focus on getting the release. The awkwardness is getting into position again, so I'm going to lie myself over the top. Maybe I've got that ball just to give me a bit of support there for the hip as well. So it's like just creating a little chain, little ball chain. So I can go down almost the back line, then I can get down the side, and then if I tip forwards I can get on that front edge. It's usually got some horrible bits in there. Again, you don't need that, we can do it without. It's just slightly more uncomfortable. So if you're new to it, you know, you'll be like, ah. So once again, I find a horrible bit, I might just kind of go all forwards and backwards. So I've recorded these videos a couple of times because of bloopers, and I've got to say the first time I did it, I could barely speak and breathe when I started, but now I've practiced it a few times, that's loosened up really nicely. So proof's in the pudding there, really. It does make a difference. So yeah, you don't need to spend very long. Yeah, so whatever you can tolerate. You certainly wouldn't be there for like 10 minutes. It's a few minutes, just poning in and then moving on somewhere else, and then just doing that regularly throughout, maybe at least once a week, but maybe a few times a week, so you're really improving the quality of it. So that's those thighs there. Now I have the same problem really in terms of hamstrings with the balls as I do with the foam roller, in that I'm not entirely sure that we get a really good feeling of release here, but there is nothing stopping you from kind of sitting on the back of the balls and just rolling your way through it. I think mainly the issue here is that we have to be in this sort of sitting position, and it's not an ideal way of getting into the tension of the balls, and also we can't really practice bending and straightening the knee here, so it's limited in its effectiveness. Again, we can get a little bit more effectiveness coming to the calf using that same technique of rolling backwards and forwards, but we've got to balance on these balls, so that's a bit harder to do as well. So, you know, I'm not convinced that this is the most useful way of getting myofascial release, but you play around with it and you see what works for you. So you can twist and turn here and just get into some of those corners around the calf muscle. The only thing you wouldn't do is you wouldn't stick these spiky balls into the small of the back of the knee. We've got some slightly precious tissues in these little areas, a bit like in the middle of the elbow joint, the armpit, the back of the knee. So you don't shove things into those areas, but you can go anywhere below that. But you know, it might feel good to you, so it's worth giving it a try. You could do the shin again, so I did that with the foam roller. It's a little bit hard to target here. Try to get the front of that shin and then just get yourself kind of rolling through there, or you could take it so that you're more in this sort of kneeling position and just rolling through that lateral part there. So again, if it feels like it's really tight and it's not a loose piece of plasticine, it's worth giving it some flow there. The other way I'll often target the backs of the legs, which works a bit more, is to place the ball between the calf and the hamstring, and then just move back into towards a sitting position. Obviously there's a block here, so you're not going to sit back, you know, you're not going to force yourself back, but just closing that gap in that little vice, and then just gradually moving the ball down, so you can work down the outside of the calf there, gradually walking down towards the tendon, which tends to be a lot easier to sit through there, and then you can work the inside, so the ball can just pop slightly, so it just pushes the tissue of the calf slightly inwards, which you can just sort of see. So then I just work down the same thing, just working through that. A bit difficult to see there actually. Swap over. So you just work your way down, and you just try and maybe roll a bit left and right in order to get different parts of the tissue. So if you haven't felt like you've managed to access the inside part of the calf, you just need to position the ball so that it does get to that. So that will get the whole of those legs going. The bottom of this chain here is worth going through is foot release. Now I'm going to do a separate video to do foot release, because I think it's something that we probably ought to just target on its own, regardless of what else is going on through the chain. So I'll go through one of those in a separate video for feet. So that's our lower limbs with the balls there. Now I'm going to do a follow-on video to this one, and we're going to come up to these buttocks, because that is where these have such a really lovely role to play. So tune in for that one.